So I'm Anastasia Pouliou. I work as an expert in the area of qualifications and credentials and the future of VET, vocational education and training at CEDEFOP. Where is CEDEFOP? CEDEFOP is in Greece. We are the European Center for the Development of Vocational Training. We were not always in Greece. We were born, let's say, in Germany, in Berlin in 1975. And then in 1995, we decided to go to Greece and then try and, let's say, consider what is happening with Europe, like the member states, what they are telling us about the development of vocational training. So we are an important agency that's trying to do a lot of research on the topic. And of course, we are working, let's say, with representatives of all countries, and we believe that this new, let's say, buzzword, if I may, this topic on micro-credentials or this different form of learning and being, let's say, you know, from what you have been used to in your whole life, how can it really be perceived and used at a national level? So this is where I am coming from, hoping that thing will work. If not, it doesn't. Anyway. Let me try and click. Perhaps, maybe we can try. Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, it would be better if it worked. But anyway, so where were we standing in 2020? Well, does it work? Yeah. Okay, there. All right, so, I mean, when we started at CEDEFOP, of course, we didn't have this EU Council recommendation in place back in that time. We actually started discussing this topic around, let's say, the COVID period, when we really saw the need for somehow engaging into discussions about how learning really is changing. We are becoming more digital, so what can we really understand about new forms and new types of learning? So, of course, then we were really discussing at CEDEFOP with colleagues about, you know, this idea of credentialing, alternative credentials. But of course, as we also heard in the morning, they are very much different. Let's say a lot of diversity and variety in the terms terms used. We have been hearing a lot about micro qualifications, nano degrees, like badges, open badges. Okay, you can call it wherever. But the thing is the following: that we have to really respect and hear very, very well and openly what countries in Europe and across, of course, the globe are actually telling us. Because we might be discussing now in 2025 this important topic on micro-credentials, but their progress and the development in different countries is not, let's say, stable. And this is okay. I mean, it's not like a competition game. I mean, we really need to understand the national context and the specificities. In my job title I have this label of the future of VET. Why? Because within this strand of work at CEDEFOP, we try really to explore how countries were developing, let's say, their vocational education and training system back in the 90s, in 1990, for instance. And we developed a lot of research reports where we were actually giving a narrative about countries' development in that sense. And I realized that this is a very important aspect. We should never forget the context. Like what is happening in Germany, in Netherlands, in Italy, or in Greece is not just like an abstract thing, but you really need to consider the specificities and the challenges within the countries, especially if you are discussing this new concept of micro-credentials. Quite often we hear about a kind of a tension that exists. How do you really try to balance this tension between regulation and flexibility, between what is happening in the public sector, in the private sector, with the companies like the AI transformation, the high-tech, all of these, let's say, enablers, as I may say so. But at the same time, we need to consider traditional qualification systems like central governance and all the different challenges that exist. So that is why I think that's always, we need to consider this tension. Now, what we did, we developed a research study back in 2020 until 2023. Our focus is on VET. I know it's higher education audience here, but yeah, labor market is important, the industry partnerships, the perspectives that come really from the labor market. And I remember I did once a very nice podcast with a wonderful professor from UK, Mr. Granger. And in that podcast, I mean, I liked a lot that, yeah, we had like this free discussion, and he said to me, Anastasia, you should never forget, micro-credentials are industry-led, right? So they come from that need of the labor market to really shake the terrain, let's say challenge the traditional way of learning and being educated. And for me, that was an interesting concept I had in mind. So what I did, we developed like specific research reports. They are available on CEDEFOP's website about, of course, the EU mapping exercise we did, We try to talk like to stakeholders representing employers, employee associations, vet providers, the ministries, the national authorities. You really need to have the bigger spectrum in front of you. Otherwise, if you're going to draft research messages, they might be somehow dangerous if they are only considered from the one perspective. So you really need to talk to different types of people in order to understand whether that thing makes sense. Of course, one of our research reports is called the added value for end users. And who are those end users? I think in the morning you said about the learners, which is very important, and then we hear about the employers. So you see, micro-credentials work very differently for different people. So this is something we really need to cover. When European Commission, of course, we're trying to develop the important EU Council recommendation, CEDEFOP tried to provide data on vet and labor market by giving information on this staff working document that was there. And also, of course, we had the recommendation, which what Isabel said in the morning is very right. They tried somehow to put the things in order. Let's find, at least, let's create a definition that can somehow resonate to most of the people. And I think that was important. And of course, all the standard elements and the other prerequisites. But at the same time, what did we do at CEDEFOP? We tried to talk to member states, and we tried to record their progress, their development. And we saw that EU member states are mainly advancing, not to a great extent or to a great, let's say, pace or rhythm, but they are trying really to implement the approach. They try to integrate somehow in their formal systems, and they try to develop, let's say, different national webinars, workshops, different stakeholders from ministries get together. So we see there's a lot of activity, and I think also there will be different reports, mentioning their progress. Of course, CEDEFOP is embarking on new research on the topic, and we try to deepen our knowledge with concrete things that I'm not going to say now. Now, I like using also metaphors. So, are micro-credentials something really, really new, or is it an old wine with a new label? Somebody likes that phrase. Yeah, I think that they are not new. I mean, we didn't really invent something new at the moment, right? We all know that all these types of certifications and credentials already existed many years. Is that right? I mean, if you look at industry certifications like from IT, I mean, they were there in the first place. But what has really changed? How do you recognize this type? I think the word recognition, and I think there were some interesting presentations earlier, is a key one. How do you really define better or even standardize, if you want? I mean, it's a really flexible landscape here. What is already existing? This is very important. And we also saw a lot of activity taking place in labor market sectors. Of course, IT is the most obvious one, yes, but what is happening with the healthcare, hospitality, social work, like manufacturing, retail, these are important areas of activity that we really need to go deeper, not just discuss about it, but really examine what they are doing. Now, of course, are they part of qualification system? That's, for me, this is in the Greek alphabet, the letter A. We should start with that. So how can they be really linked to an existing qualification system? I mean, do they have a potential to really be integrated in a framework and thus bear a kind of a leveling? And why? A level, of course, is an element of trust. But is it that simple? What kind of processes are needed? This is important. Our CEDEFOP study in 2020 to 2023 gave us insights on two main areas. One is modularization. We also heard it in the morning. Of course, if you think about Croatia, for instance, other learning, this is key. Like you see, modules are already there. And quite often their characteristics are similar to this term. And you know what? I think we should, like when we were doing this mapping exercise, countries were telling us, okay, micro-credentials, I don't know, like the Slovakians would say, are you talking about micro-qualifications? If yes, this is in the formal system. But maybe you're referring to micro-certificates, which are mainly in the private sector. So what is really happening? And what we were telling them is that we don't care about the term necessarily, but what is hidden behind. We have to be very careful on when using that term to really understand what we talk about, what is the profile and the characteristics of those type of credentials, if I may, that we are really interested in. In Croatia, as I said, again, micro-qualification, that's very much linked to the Adult Act. Quite often we see legal arrangements and documents, legislatory documents having an important value. I think the lady from Germany mentioned that. I understand that like having a legal basis is a way forward because you see things are happening, but how can we really formalize it somehow? And then, of course, in Ireland for us, I mean, it's a very interesting case example because they are very advanced. They have been having an open qualification system where they are trying, for instance, to integrate these awards, like these smaller qualifications, very small, as 5 credits. So already this situation can act as an enabling factor for a micro-credential to enter the system. This is important. Now, how qualifications frameworks need to open up to these new, let's say in quotation marks, types of learning in specific ways. And CEDEFOP has been doing a very important monitoring exercise many, many years now, I mean, before 2000, where we try to report on the progress by member states. And what do we see? Those countries in Europe that have created a qualification framework that is actually integrating non-formal qualifications, again, they create enabling conditions for micro-credentials to flourish and to really find their way. And we also saw currently that 13 countries in Europe have reported to us that at least a part or a type of a micro-credentials can be, an important component of their framework. And of course, other countries are following. So you see, that is related to the progress of where we are now. And I think Shizuka mentioned that in the morning. Where are we in these 3 different layers? Of course, it's the skills discussion, the unions of skills, the skills portability, these words, skills, skills, skills. But what are skills? And where are qualifications, I'm always asking. So it's the skills intensity, the governance, the training, all of these different elements, but we really need to see the dynamics within the specific sectors of economy, right? And what are the specific needs in those sectors. Of course, now we have this focus on the green, on the digital. Yeah, we have these brand names, Amazon, Google, Cisco, IBM. Yeah, this is wonderful because they are brand names and they are trusted providers of training, and they were like that before micro-credentials, weren't they? Now, what is interesting to see is what is happening in the different other parts of the economy, like industrial cleaning training, for instance, that we saw, for instance, emerging and being offered in different levels of the NQF and DQF. Or like we also see quite a lot different types of partnerships and cooperations among countries, like here, for instance, this METI for Skills project. This is a kind of a VET provider that operates on microelectronics, and it is actually a common, let's say, effort by people representing different countries. So you see, there's a lot of activity in the terms of the specific sector and which type of countries are actually involved. Now, as I'm very much, and as Anthony said, because I'm trying a bit to just prepare the basis for what comes next in the next session, I wanted just to take a glimpse and for you to see a very concrete exercise we have done. Of course, the letters are very small, you don't need to read them. But what I want to show you with that one is that when CEDEFOP tried to understand what was happening in 2 labor markets in Europe, manufacturing and retail, and my God, they are like huge, they are very important labor market sectors, quite diverse. I mean, we got a bit, not lost, but we received like a diverse pool of data that would tell us the following. For instance, you are going to identify a micro-credential on manufacturing in particular in France, in Denmark, in different other countries. And what do you see? There are some common characteristics. First of all, micro-credentials in the sector are mainly referring to highly targeted types of training. So it's around the specific occupation profile that you are in need of advanced training. So that's fine and that's clear. Then, of course, we see this a new focus on more emerging technologies, and that's why people would like to upskill, reskill within the sector. Again, we're fine here. Duration, of course, there's the diversity. We can talk about training that can last from hours, days, to months. And I think somebody mentioned that we need to know exactly the credit, the workload, the hours a day. I'm sorry, but we can't, if I may, because that's not the point. It's okay to have some hours of training or even days. What is really important, what kind of competencies, learning outcomes you have been achieving, is that recognized for further learning, for employment? That's the key questions we need to be asking, not the credit workload. I'm sorry for that. And countries are very sensitive in Europe. They don't want anybody imposing to them and saying that type of credit bearing is a good, let's say, or an accepted micro-credential. We have to allow for some freedom in countries themselves to develop what is best. Now, of course, the mode of delivery can differ in different types of labor market economy. It can be in-person, blended. But what I really, really would like to focus on, and I think the speaker from Australia also hinted towards that, how do you really talk about, how do you perceive the concept of learning outcomes? This is a key component that is, of course, part of the definition at the European level And also from CEDEFO's side, we have been doing a lot of research work on this aspect. And when we mean, what do we mean about learning outcomes? With Peter Mitchell, we talk about it a lot internally. We say, is it right? Like we talk about competencies, right? But maybe yes, maybe not. Maybe learning outcomes is a broader term. And then what you're actually considering if you think about intended and actually achieved learning outcomes, we try to use this dichotomy at CEDEFOP. And I think that was in the Australian case that I found very interesting, that he was mentioning how do you really demonstrate your, how do you assess your demonstrated performance? What do you really know on the job? Because employers want to see workers that can do the job now, not yesterday. They don't care about the diplomas. Yes, this is a formal requirement, but then can they do the job? So for me, this learning outcomes description is a key element, but if I'm going to identify specific micro-credentials and I'm going to analyze them, do I really see a description of based on learning outcomes there? Not always. And here, this exercise showed us that it's mainly a kind of a content description. So it's not that thing that we're talking about, and there's a lot of awareness raising that needs to be made on how you're drafting learning outcome statements for certifications, for credentials, and of course, for qualifications. End users, key players, who are they? Learners, employers, vet providers, universities, or people like policymakers. There are so many different benefits on those. I can have like a huge list. So it really depends to whom are we addressing this topic, to which are the people, we talk about, if you go back to your universities, who are you talking to? And if you're going to form partnerships, let's say, with industry, so then the employers have different, let's say, needs or awareness of what is happening in the labor market in that sense. Now, I tried, inspired from this new topic, which again is not that new, I was inspired a bit to dig deeper and explore what is really happening with regards to VET, Vocational Education and Training. This is my agency's, let's say, focus. And what did I do? Well, I tried to design four scenarios for the future. And of course, again, my starting point and my basis, what are we really talking about? Which is the content and the profile of those types of micro-credentials? Do they really form part of formal learning? Are they really something that is provided by companies? Do they have a social function role? And there are specific sessions on social and inclusion aspects that I heard before in the other session. For example, groups at risk they are in need of reskilling. What is really happening? So once you define what you talk about, then you are able to examine it more carefully, even provide recommendations and somehow support this process. But we cannot put everything in the same bucket, I would say. Now, our CEDEFOP research is currently exploring the following. For the next 3 years and until 2027, we would like to understand better what is happening with non-formal learning. Of course, we have been reducing at CEDEFOP glossaries in terms of what is formal, non-formal, informal learning, recognition of prior learning, all these different terms that are currently being used. But, think about it like we learn a lot, like mainly informally or even non-formally, right? So, but if you're going to really understand this diversity of non-formal, let's say, setting of micro-credentials, of course, quality assurance, as we heard, and recognition are two key elements. We definitely need to, let's say, put a greater effort in understanding better what is happening on labor market. We have been producing research reports on manufacturing retail, and we are currently investigating construction sector, which is very interesting because it's a very traditional, large economical sector, but with a lot of need of reskilling, basic workers, let's say, needs, but at the same time, there's a lot of this green impact on the sector, so you really need to see whether micro-credentials can provide some solution there. And we are currently very much interested in creative and cultures industry, video game, 3D filming, all these more creative arts, and why for that specific sector, because again, the types of skills and competencies that are needed in the sector are quite interesting for us. And of course, we are also putting our focus on social inclusion, and again, we need to understand who are those disadvantaged people, learners, workers, migrants, women out there that are in need of being integrated in learning. And of course, hopefully we can, let's say, produce some good results also for the next years. Now, if we talk about the diversity of micro-credentials, I think what is very important is the purpose. Are you going to acquire a micro-credential because you have been left out, you are like an early leaver, or like perhaps you are currently employed, or what is really happening? For us, this is an important question to ask. But then, on quality assurance and recognition, somebody said today morning, quality assurance framework exists at the European level, and I would fully align with that statement. But the main problem is the usage. I mean, do we really use what is already existing? Is there enough awareness raising? What is happening? And then on micro-credentials, how do you quality assure them? In our survey, stakeholder group survey that we did in 2021 and 2022, we had like more than 1,500 people that participated in that survey. They were telling us that if you are going to align a micro-credential with an existing framework at the national level, this is an element of trust and quality, for sure. That, again, certifies and somehow acknowledges the work that countries have been doing on NQFs, on developing frameworks. But then if it comes from the labor market sector, it has to do a lot with the credibility of the provider, who is actually putting the stamp on what you're actually learning. So there are different dimensions there. Then what is happening, again, with regards to governance and cooperation? I think that employers, in particular, need to be there when you're designing a kind of a training program. They have to be there also to add from content, from the specific needs within their area of remit. So it's not, sometimes we talk to education institutions and vet providers, higher education institutions, but then if you're going to design something that has to be industry-led or for the industry, you need to invite those people again in the same table. And of course, recognition. Recognition is a key element. At CEDEFOP, we did something which is very interesting, maybe for you to know. So when we talk about recognition of prior learning is one thing, but then what type of skills and competencies you have been acquiring. So we might refer to the very basic foundational skills, as we say, but we are also discussing a lot this new trend of soft skills or transversal skills and competencies. And what we have done at CEDEFOP, we produce a terminological model on what transversal skills and competencies are. This is a huge piece of work. We created a kind of a mind map where we are detailing what exactly it means to work in a team, to be autonomous, learn how to learn all these social life skills, all of that. And I think what people really need now, because we are really advancing the debate on micro-credentials, is guidance. So we need to know, how do you define the competencies that somebody is getting? Is it more occupation-specific competencies, or is it more transversal skill ones? How do you assess them based on learning outcomes? Learning outcomes is an approach that has, from the 80s, 70s, there's a lot of research work that has been happening, and CEDEFOP has been producing handbooks on how to define and use learning outcomes for qualifications design and for credentials design. So what I think is that in order to understand, the types of competencies people have, you need to know how to really find them and how do you actually categorize them or, let's say, identify them in that sense. Labor market sector relevance is very much linked to what I just said. Do micro-credentials within the sectors, I said, for instance, in construction, really focus only on occupation-specific skills, or is it more than that, or both? This is important for research, these kind of questions. And of course, to what extent can they be really used in job vacancies? Again, at CEDEFOP, we have a great tool, the Skills of Aid, where we try to get millions of ads out there being published online and try to extract the specific requirements from the job portals. I mean, we try to look at what employers need, what do they want? And that requires a lot of analysis and empirical data. And in that sense, we need to see whether micro-credentials can have a place in that recruitment processes compared to full qualifications. And I doubt that in the future we will not be asked to have a degree. I mean, the idea of micro-credential is not to challenge what is existing. It's just an add-on, it's a complementary. It's a way to show what you have been learning in other, let's say, streams of life. And I think this is very much important. And social inclusion is key. I mean, we talk about lifelong, life-wide, somebody said, who was Stefano, life deep learning. You can call it in different ways, but it is like, how do you learn while growing? Really, all the time we should be learning. And I think in that sense, how can we support individuals in that sense when they cannot access learning? We have wars happening, we have all these challenges and barriers. So what kind of support measures are needed? And our research is going to produce concrete recommendations and implementation guidelines in order to support those in need. Perhaps development of portals, cooperation, partnerships, or somehow like what Anthony did, raising awareness on the topic. And as time is running, and I will try to, as much as possible, to finalize my speech, of course there's a vision. on micro-credentials, but for this to happen, there are different areas we need to explore, how transparent they can be, how do you really motivate people in order to engage in that type of learning, especially if you think about the main weaknesses that many people already mentioned in the morning. There's a lot of uncertainty, but sometimes confusion even now, so we are not running towards the future. That is why I think these different elements I'm adding there, how do you really build trust on micro-credentials is not just one thing. You need to have all these credibility, reputation, assessment practices, quality assurance arrangements in place. And these are our publications. They are available online. We have been doing briefing notes, short leaflets, podcasts. We have a dedicated webpage, and when Commission does that page, maybe we can get connected. And that's it. Didn't manage to exceed. Thank you very much.